Hi, I'm Daniel Bolt, and this is Integrity Matters. Today we're unpacking a difficult, fast-moving story. Reports that the United States military has been blowing up small boats that the administration says are used by Latin American drug cartels. This raises three big questions. Is it lawful? Is it effective? And what happens to integrity when public anger runs hot? As of the middle of November 2025 in Australia, here's the headline picture. With the usual caveat that details vary by outlet and cut-off date. Since early September, US forces have carried out repeated lethal strikes on suspected drug-running boats in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific. Reported death counts vary by source, but they land in the dozens across multiple strikes. The administration frames this as a part of an armed conflict with cartels. Diplomatic shock. In the last day or so, the United Kingdom has reportedly paused certain maritime drug intelligence sharing with the US, citing concerns about lawfulness and potential British complicity if UK-derived intelligence is used to target and kill suspects at sea. France has voiced similar legal concerns, and the United Nations Human Rights Chief has urged the US to stop the strikes, warning that these may amount to extrajudicial killings if no armed conflict exists.
The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, has said that airstrikes by the United States of America on boats in the Caribbean and in the Pacific violate international human rights law.
You'll also hear firm support from within the US government. The Defence Secretary has said that the administration has every authorisation needed. Supporters argue these are terrorist-level organisations, and that decisive action saves lives. We're going to examine both sides, carefully, fairly, and in plain English. So let's look at the law, the war rules or policing rules. Let's translate the legal debate without jargon. The administration's cases, in simple terms, is some cartels are treated as terrorist organisations. Therefore, this is an armed conflict and the law of armed conflict applies, often abbreviated to LOAC. Under LOAC, lethal forces can be used against legitimate military targets when it meets distinction, necessity, and proportionality. Domestically, the administration also says that the necessary legal authority and has briefed Congress. The counter case from many international law experts and human rights bodies says that drug trafficking is a crime, not a war. Unless it's a genuine armed conflict, peacetime human rights law and maritime law apply. That peacetime baseline includes the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, or UNCLOS, which sets out the general rule for conduct on the high seas. The United States has not ratified UNCLOS, but says it follows most of it as customary international law, and most of the world treats UNCLOS as the standard. The 1988 United Nations Convention against illicit traffic in narcotic drugs and psychotropic substances, often just called a 1988 Drug Trafficking Convention, Article 17 of that treaty sets up how states cooperate at sea, interdict, visit, board vessels, search and seize, generally with the consent of the flag state, not destroy vessels and kill crews as a default response. The United States is a party to this convention. The International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the ICCPR, which protects the right to life and limits the use of lethal force to strict necessity, typically in response to imminent threat. There's also US domestic practice at sea. The Maritime Drug Law Enforcement Act, or MDLEA, which for decades has been used to stop, board, arrest and prosecute suspected traffickers, usually led by the US Coast Guard, sometimes with Navy support. The MDLEA is a law enforcement model. It is not a blank check for standoff killing of suspects at sea. So here's the core of the legal dispute. If you accept that there is an actual armed conflict with cartels, then LOAC might apply. And the US will argue that each strike met distinction, military necessity, and proportionality. If you do not accept that there is an armed conflict, then peacetime law applies. And the correct model is interdict, board, seize and arrest with lethal force as a last resort against an imminent threat to life. This is why the UK has reportedly paused part to its intelligence sharing. The concern is legal complicity of British information helps select targets for potentially unlawful killings at sea. And it's why you're hearing strong language from the UN and others. One more contrast matters. On land, inside Mexico, a senior Pentagon official has testified that the US military does not have the authority for drone strikes against cartels, and the Mexican president has rejected any such military operations on Mexican soil. So the question becomes, if it's not acceptable on land, why should the bar be lower at sea? Let's look at now how effective sinking boats, and does it reduce the drug supply? Now to the strategic question. I'm going to separate my professional experience from the external record so you can clearly see where each point comes from. My perspective, clearly marked as my own, based on my 25 plus years in investigations, is that in my experience, supply reduction alone rarely ends a drug market. What typically happens is displacement, the so-called balloon effect, where pressure in one place simply shifts routes, methods, or actors to another place. I've seen what practitioners call the shotgun import. What this means is that instead of moving one 100 kilogram load, groups send 101 kilogram loads through different vectors. They accept that some will get caught, but the overall risk and loss are capped. While profits can increase when demand is strong, as it is often, a clamp on supply tends to raise price more than it reduces use. Higher prices can actually attract new entrants and fund better concealment. And our visibility is limited by design. In Australia, for example, border agencies use risk-based targeting for sea and air cargo. Only a fraction of consignments are physically opened and inspected. The true number of undetected shipments is unknowable. A lack of seizures does not mean a lack of attempts. It may simply mean we just didn't see them. Evidence in the public record that supports this view includes decades of research that describe the balloon effect. Strong enforcement in one corridor tends to displace flows elsewhere rather than eliminate them. Public reporting by border and police agencies shows persistent postal and parcel pipelines and a trend toward fragmented consignments to limit loss. Border systems around the world rely on screening and targeting, not blanket physical inspection, because blanket inspection is practically impossible at scale. Counterpoint you should also know. US officials say visibly military action has deterred the supply, raises perceived risk and can disrupt supply chains in the short term. They point to new task forces and claim operational success through public evidence of specific drug quantities or detailed drug-targeted intelligence. For most strikes, remains unlimited, making independent effectiveness assessments difficult. So the bottom line of effectiveness, even if some boats are sunk, markets adapt. Without demand reduction, financial flows, targeting poor governance, and corruption-proof logistics, a maritime hammer on its own is unlikely to sustainably reduce supply. So let's talk about public sentiment and the politics. Recent polling cited in media reports suggests majority support. Sometimes around 7 in 10 Americans are forward use of the military against the boat cartels. Polls are not law, but politically, strong public approval lowers the friction for extraordinary measures. From an integrity standpoint, we need to watch for something that happens in every crisis. When the public feels a policy is morally right, we often question legality less and efficacy less, especially under the banner of national security. That is precisely where transparency and independent review matter most. Even more controversial, let's look at the 9/11 parallel. Do the new threats justify new rules? A new kind of threat demands new tools and unconventional responses. After 9/11, the US passed the authorization for use of military force, the AUMF of 2001, and expanded the geographic scope and methods of counter-terrorism operations. Today's argument goes like this. If cartels are terrorist-level organisations, then treat them like armed enemies and apply war rules wherever they operate, including at sea. The warning from critics is equally clear. Emergency frameworks can outpace evidence, oversight and due process, and they have a habit of becoming the new normal. Human rights protections do not switch off, even in armed conflict, even in extraterritorial areas. So the key questions become, what are the limiting principles? Where is the evidence for each strike? How do we verify distinction, necessity and proportionality in real time, not years later? So let's look at the difference between sea versus land operations abroad. At sea, the standard playbook in peacetime is visit, board, search or arrest, often with the flag of state consent, as reflected in UNCLOS practice in Article 17 of the 88 Drug Trafficking Convention. Lethal force is a last resort tied to an imminent threat. The current boat blowing approach is a sharp departure from the law enforcement model. On land in Mexico, there is no credible evidence of a US military kinetic strikes against cartels. The Pentagon has told Congress it lacks authority for such strikes in Mexico. Mexico's president has rejected US military operations on Mexican soil.
It won't happen. We have an understanding regarding security, so that's not going to happen.
In Colombia, historically, the US role under Plan Colombia has been support, training, intelligence and aerial fumigation support, with Colombian forces conducting operations. That is not the same as US military strikes on cartel targets. Let's go back now and look at some of the history around some of the often touted but never proven, did the CIA enable the drug trade? You'll hear claims that the US, particularly the CIA, enabled drug trafficking abroad to finance foreign policy in the Cold War. Here's what credible official inquiries actually found. In 1989, the US Senate's Kerry inquiry reported substantial evidence that individual Contra-linked actors engaged in trafficking and that US funds had reached some traffickers. That is serious, but the committee did not conclude that the CIA leadership ran the drug trade. In 1998, the CIA Inspector General and the US Department of Justice Inspector General did not find a CIA-directed crack cocaine scheme. They did document contacts, tolerance and failures of oversight involving Contra-linked traffickers. In short, a record of damaging contacts and lapses, not proof of a centralised CIA program to finance policy through cocaine. This history is not a legal basis for today's boat strikes, but it does explain why so many people demand evidence and independent oversight when lethal force is used in secret. So where does this leave the US legality? If you do not accept that there is a genuine armed conflict, then peacetime law governs. That means the default is interdict, board, seize, arrest, and lethal force only to stop an imminent threat. That is why the UN and key allies are alarmed and why the UK has reportedly stepped back from sharing some intelligence. From my investigative experience, markets adapt. Without demand reduction, targeting the money, clean ports and logistics, and anti-corruption safeguards, a maritime hammer alone seldom changes long-term supply. Public reporting on risk-based inspections and persistent parcel pipelines supports this reality. So integrity. Extraordinary measures demand extraordinary transparency. If strikes are lawful and necessary, governments should release enough verified facts promptly to show who was targeted and why, and to demonstrate distinction, necessity and proportionality. If not, accountability must follow, because ends justifies means is the point where the integrity goes to die. If you found this helpful, subscribe and hit the bell so new episodes find you. Next up, I'll walk you through some more integrity issues and the red flags to look for when governments claim that their actions are appropriate or not. I'm Daniel Bolsh. This is Integrity Matters. Let's keep asking the right questions together.